we get a roll call, please?
Allers,
Here.
Deegan,
Here.
Inslee, Lester, Mealy,
Here.
Schwartz, Spencer,
Here.
Spicer,
Present.
Wiseman, Wright.
Here. Very much. I believe the first item on is the Parks and Recreation Department budget. Ms. Perry?
It is. I want to point out just a couple of things before we get started. As Parks and Recreation goes through and starts talking about the budget that they have presented, one of the things that we did not have included in the mayor's budget that did go to the commission were capital projects items, and Parks will be talking about those things tonight. I have already preloaded those items onto the parking lot, so we will talk about those again during the first meeting where discussions with council occur. We can go through the individual projects again and stuff like that. We also have one other item that we've preloaded on the parking lot. As we get to the police department, there will be a couple of positions that I have included in police that should be included in the SRO department. So we've preloaded both of those things. You'll hear about those as we go through their presentations, and then we'll cover them again in the first meeting where we start the parking lot and bring that up during council discussion.
Can anyone tell us where in our packet Parks budget starts? 311. I'm sorry. Okay, great. Thank you very much for that information. Mr. Eichel, are you presenting for the department?
I am.
All right, sir. Where is yours?
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mayor, Chairman, as I said, City Council and staff. As always, we appreciate the opportunity to present our fiscal 24 budget for Parks, Recreation, Forestry Department. A couple things. First, I'd like to acknowledge and thank our staff, and specifically Andrew Brunner, our senior management specialist, as well as Sheila Perry, for working with us and getting through our aspect of the budget. Those extra time and effort in doing so is certainly greatly appreciated. I'd also like to thank our commission. Some of our attendants tonight, Stu Murphy, Roger Schwartz, and Mary Shantz are all here. We thank their dedication and commitment to our commission. And just to note, also, our commission is greatly involved in our budget. We began talking our budget in April and kind of go through some iterations and cycles of that budget and priorities, and we hear back from the local citizens in our community on what items they'd like to see. And then the staff takes those on and we kind of roll all those up and then present that to the commission for approval and ultimately you as well, which is why we're here tonight. I mentioned what I would call the executive summary that's on the screen there. It highlights four basic things. As you can see there, Riverside, and this is for fiscal year 24, Riverside as well as Memorial Park shelter renovations. We had a wind storm kind of go through. I don't remember when that was. Do you remember exactly? Was it May or June?
Yeah, about 3 months ago.
So, and when we were going out and some of the staff, maintenance folks were going out and looking at buildings and things, they noticed some other things that wasn't necessarily related to wind, some water. Neither one of those two pavilions have been touched, with the exception of an addition, for quite a few years. And as we inspected them for structure and just overall improvements and renovations, we felt that those two things needed to be factored into our 2024 budget. And most things in parks, as most of you are aware, are not cheap, and those probably won't be. So that's why they kind of made the list there. The other two things there are botanical gardens and pickleball courts. Pickleball courts I'll talk about specifically. I think we're going to get those, at least the hard structures, built by winter, maybe late fall, and then get them ready to prep and get them presentable to the community for full use in the spring. So that's why it kind of rolled over to 2024. So that kind of gives you an update on the pickleball courts, because I know so many of our community enjoys playing pickleball and are looking forward to those courts being available. Botanical gardens, you'll see those really, frankly, you'll see that, frankly, budgetary-wise for the next number of years because of our commitment to the botanical gardens and the importance that we feel that that's going to add to the ambiance and relativity of Riverside Park. So you're going to see that continually for the next few years of our overall ramp up and investment over a period of time. We'll take little bites of that apple as we can throughout the budget cycles to prepare that, and looking forward to the relationship that we're building there. So other highlights, as we're all aware, fiscal 24, we'll see a big change for us, or no, I shouldn't say a big change. The biggest change for us relative to the budget really is about the personnel costs associated with the study that was done last year, and then the projected what's in the mayor's budget for this year personnel costs. So really the budget's pretty similar to last year. Obviously we moved some projects around. I mean, we get that from year to year, so projects are different, but the money's pretty similar. But the biggest difference is as you roll through the actual budget and the 3-page document that's attached to this, that I'll kind of thumb through here in a moment, is really about cost of goods is set aside the personnel piece of it. The cost of goods is probably the biggest increase that you'll see, and that really runs across the span of parks. There's lots of different things, and I say cost of goods, that's anything from concession to equipment, fertilizer, fuel, et cetera, propane gas. So there's, as you'll see through here, there's lots of things relative to cost of goods. So between salary and cost of goods, those are your two biggest differences from previous year's budget. So dive in here to the actual budget specific items, and hopefully you're able to see those. And I highlighted some areas, and again, you're going to see a constant flow here relative to cost of goods, so I won't address each one of those in each individual budget or departments within the budget. Talk about, let's see, natural gas. We talked briefly about that. Memorial Park, I'll talk about that briefly because we felt relative to the concrete decking at Memorial Park, we felt like we really needed to do that and improve that. And that was about $47,000, just that of itself, or will be. And of course, these are estimates, but I feel pretty good about the estimate there. Let's see, water increase, jump down to 250. I'll hit that there, I think. Water increase based on FY22 usage, that played a little bit of a factor there. But as you scroll down through there, you'll see, bumps, but modest bumps relative to various different things. Specifically, I'll go down to parks and maintenance, software license maintenance agreement software. You'll see that a couple different places through here as we try to upgrade and stay with software requirements. Cameras, that again, relative to install, and I'm going to defer to Aaron on this, Aaron Griffrath, about our specific cameras, because he's done a really good job of working with Chief Wildy and the police department in that area. So if I could, I'll just briefly put that over here and let you talk about that.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mayor, council members. So like Chris said, we have taken a very active approach to park safety when it comes to implementing cameras throughout the parks. One of our most significant ones that we did last year is working with the police department. We have teamed up and used the flock safety cameras. So we have license plate readers throughout various parks that have proven to be very beneficial. Some of those parks include Community Park, Long Park, Ellis Porter Park, The Link, Vendor Park. So we're not quite done, but we've made huge strides, and we will continue to evaluate where our issues continue to grow, and we found that through cameras and security, it has helped alleviate some of those problems.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Councilman Spencer.
yeah, since you're on the cameras, could I just ask a quick question?
Of course.
With all the recent investment and remodel at, I call it the Warden House, or some people call it the Manor, where the botanical garden is there going to be an emphasis maybe on some cameras and security there?
I've already got a plan in place for the manor. It's just a matter of when we decide we want to do it. I have layouts done.
So to take it a little step further, in all our parks, Aaron's taken a very, not just proactive, but a deliberate approach to trying to figure out what works best relative to cost, because you can spend a lot of money pretty quick in this area. And we got to find those areas that are specifically needed, not just a park, but within that area. So we'll continue to program and push the envelope to try to make sure that we want, as everybody wants, complete, safe, and reportable parks. So it's a huge benefit for the police department as well as our department to be able to go back and look up, and the police department to directly look up what they need and who's in the parks at the time that they need it.
Obviously, those cameras helped with an investigation. I don't want to really elaborate because of its unfortunate circumstances, but that was an excellent tool that helped with a certain case. So great.
Well, it's a priority for us. There's no question we'll continue to be. Sure. Yes, sir. As I mentioned, software license as well as maintenance, campground, outdoor recreation, going to improve campground Wi-Fi out there. We, of course, did it at the amphitheater. Two big areas and with that comes relative costs. So bring that as well. Transportation costs relative to community enrichment camps. I'm just highlighting some areas. There's some other things that are consistent price-wise, but just trying to highlight a few things. Electricity decrease. We talk about that. We programmed and budgeted that 2 years ago. So we did that pretty aggressively, not knowing exactly where we would be in some of our areas, particularly the link. And we're just trying to catch up to itself. It's leveling itself out over the course of the budget. So that's why you see an average decrease there. Did I answer that?
Yes, that's correct.
And then the link income distribution, that's basically an invoice that we have with Lincoln as a MOU, and what we've agreed to pay for and what we share the cost for. And that includes maintenance, cleaning service, salary, a little bit for one of their police officers. We kicked on that, and relatively other things, maintenance outside the building and HVAC and stuff. Maintenance agreements, there's 2 or 3 of those, maybe 4 of those there that needed to be done in relation to the link. And those are part of those increases that I spoke about. Like I said, the Wi-Fi amphitheater was a big deal. Because we work through Ticketmaster, they have to have, it's kind of a low spot, so they kind of have to have really high-speed internet to be able to run multiple sites and be able to have accurate real-time data. So that again, part of the evolution of keeping things updated, that was one of the things that we did there to make sure that we were able to access and they were able to access the ticket information and that. Basically, in summary, I'm going to talk about some of the capital projects that are out there. Like I said, the botanical gardens are there. Ice arena HVAC upgrades, that's a pretty significant one, and it's part of the study that we did 2 years ago.
June of 2021.
2 years ago. So they came back to us and said that we were basically living on borrowed time relative to the HVAC, and so we started programming and started moving things around as far as what we could handle and when, and that's one of the big ones that we're going to take care of right there. So big ticket item. Golf course maintenance and equipment, we're constantly updating equipment, new contracts relative to lease equipment that we use at the golf course, and that's what that area is. Frog Hollow Trail Connector, obviously a big one, an important one, and relative to our greenway connections. So we're obviously always looking at areas to invest in and connect greenway, and that's a yearly budget thing that we do. Southwest Boulevard, Duncan Street, same thing. Memorial Park, pool, Tots area, that was an investment that we made, and I believe there was some issues with electricity.
It was over the past 3 years, we've started to see, due to the life of the apparatus, we're starting to see a lot of metal shards come out through the filters and everything. So it's, obviously a high risk to young children that are playing in there.
So we felt the need to address that, and again, big ticket item. And then the East Miller Park plan, with the East Miller Park transition possibly at one time being a cemetery, and unfortunately, as far as that project goes, wasn't able to go, but we still can promised the residents in that area that we'd make improvements to East Miller Park, and this is basically phase one of that. There are some shreds in the master plan that address some of that. And we're going to take little bites and as appropriate bites as that as possible. So that's in the budget. And the inclusive park plan is kind of similar to that, in that we wanted very much to be part of the Sugar Baker property and work with coordination with Special Learning Center on that project. And it wound up not working out quite the way that we had hoped. But we identified the need and continue to hear from our citizens in relation to all-inclusive park. So we're still trying to figure out the best location for that. This is kind of one of those things we're putting in the budget to try to program for it, take a little bite of it at a time, and identify that our community, in large part, since we have the headquarters of Special Olympics here, that there's a need for an all-inclusive park here. So we're gonna figure out a way to make that work and deliver a good product to our citizens and our guests. And then Riverside Memorial Shelters, like I said, I mentioned that in the outset, and those are, again, pricey items, $500,000 for those. So subject to that summary, I mean, we always got capital improvements going on, and as you can see, we've got $2 million scheduled for that. Our park fund balance remains to be strong above required, and at the end of FY 20 to 24, we anticipate it being just over $5 million. So we're going to do that. Because we've got some big ticket items that are expensive, we're going to try to be wise in our park fund balance to let it grow a little bit to where we can pay those items out of park fund balance in years future. So that kind of gives you a synopsis and executive summary of our budget. Subject to your questions.
Councilwoman Wiseman.
Yes, thank you. Just, can you remind me that the Botanical Gardens, is that just the new name for the Master Gardeners group, or is it something different?
In cooperation with them, they're our partners. So the Botanical Garden is going to be the north side of the manor. So it's to use a military term, it's a spur that runs out towards the river, and it's going to have a lookout. It's going to be quite something.
And they're working in connection with the parks to
Yes,
get
ma'am.
that done.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. Yeah, they're going to do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to planting and what they plant and how they plant. We're going to, of course, provide from our forestry division, and then we're going to. The first phase is to grade it and get it to where they can start planting. But we got to get. It's going to look like I would say a kind of a zigzag down the hill, a slower grade to where it's handicapped accessible as well.
Are they going to have a separate garden of their own, or is that going to be the?
That's the primary one, to the best of my knowledge. They may have other projects going around, but that'll be their major investment.
I just wasn't sure if they were going to have their own separate, do whatever they want area.
Well, based on the MOU, and Aaron may be able to speak to this more specifically than I am, but it's my understanding based on the MOU, they're going to have pretty good wide range of ability to plant and use that space as their own as far as planting goes. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Councilman Schwartz.
Thank you all for that.
Sir.
Can you walk me through where we're at on the, what we're doing on the forestry piece? I know there's, and I've talked to Ms. Perry and the chief about some concerns I have, but we're obviously part of your all's identity, part of your title. And it sounds to me like we're just completely getting rid of that and contracting it out to a private contractor. Is that the case, or where are we at on that?
So there's a couple of things I would say about forestry, which may not necessarily been part of your question, but we have an actual tree farm next to Oak Hills. It's part of our forestry that we grow trees to backfill needed areas, not just on the golf course, but citywide. But the forestry side of it, I think you're probably referring to basically just tree service related, tear down or take down and removal. We certainly over time have seen that division transition a little bit because to probably do that, this is probably more Chris's opinion necessarily, so Aaron, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if you factor in all the trees that you just not only have to do inspections for, but then you got to identify if they have to be taken down and then or replaced. We do all the replacing of trees. The only thing we use help with is taking them down and as far as removing them and disposing of them. That we have found that it's more, from a budgetary standpoint, makes more sense to be able to do that and contract that out as needed, as opposed to try to have a specific group of 6 to 8, maybe 10 folks on staff that would do that. So from an economical standpoint, we feel it'd be better to contract as needed or as required, as opposed to maintaining those resources and assets internally.
Which I appreciate that, and I'm trust me, I'm not against private contracts versus government employees. My problem lies in the fact that doing that runs into direct opposition of what it specifically says in our city code about forestry, which is that we should have a city forester. The city forester is responsible for multiple different things, which includes permitting, number one. But then it also says that we are required, the Forestry Commission shall utilize Parks and Recreation employees and equipment for the care and maintenance of street trees, public parking lot. Additional funding is approved by the council. So my former life over at the other building, we run into situations like these where we ran into direct contrast with state statute, in this case our city code. So it's not really a question. It's something I've been talking about with them. I don't know if we have the ability to do that based on our city code. And so we can talk offline too about, ways to look at it, and if we need to modify the code or whatever, because I prefer to save money, bottom line. I just don't know if we can do it.
And part of that, from a budgetary standpoint, is trying to find an arborist that we can afford, frankly. So that's part of the equation so that may lead to your question about the code.
I've had 2 different constituents call this week about tree issues. And so I know it's important to have somebody that we can turn to who can identify a tree, determine whether it needs to be cut down. And I don't know if tree cutters out there that are contracted do that. I don't know if they're certified arborists or not. Most of them, I suspect, have a lot of equipment and just lop them down as soon as they get the call. But take a look at Chapter 23, Article 2. There are specific provisions in there, especially with regard to the position of city forester, that without having one on staff, I'm concerned that those things won't get done.
Councilman Mealy, saw your hand a minute ago.
I probably don't need to go on too long because it's moving, but I had a question for staff.
What?
In your estimation, like if we had a city forester who was a certified arborist, could we preventatively save trees to reduce costs? I mean, has that been, looking back, I don't know how long we've been without a city forester, a year or less, maybe more, I'm not sure, but looking back, could you make a statement, a fair statement that a city forester would prevent trees from decline?
I personally, and this is just my experience from my former life, I don't know that you could prevent them from getting viruses and the sicknesses that they get. But we do have a person on staff that goes out and does inspect trees. And he does give a report as to whether or not that tree should come down or not. And then also I'd add, from mission of our forestry department and philosophical of our department, you take down one, you replace it with two. So it kind of puts us in a little bit of a quandary when we start taking down a property line tree or a right-of-way tree. Where are we going to put two more of them at? In theory, what do we do? How do we get for one out of it? And so, yeah, we certainly understand that there's an element of concern from our citizens, and relative to our department, our forestry, we certainly want to accomplish our mission relative to the law and the code. But we ran into a problem in fairness, of trying to find certified arborists. And Aaron, do you have anything to specifically add to that?
No, I mean, I would second what Chris just said, that, we do, send someone out in the event someone calls to inspect the trees just before we drop, make sure we're not dropping trees just because. So I know we've had conversations on the future, as far as an arborist, what does it look like? With Mr. Wallace retiring, we're constantly talking and having discussions on that to find the right candidate, because, we want to make sure we also get the right person in there too.
And I'd also note, just as long as we're talking trees, so far this fiscal year, we've expended about $179,000 in cost relative to trees, cleaning out trees. That includes Wares Creek, Washington Park, Memorial Park, and Adrian's Island, and then pretty decent amount of non-park trees too. So it's a significant investment for sure.
I'm familiar with it. I went out after getting permission, went out to Memorial Park and cut invasive vine off of trees. And, this was 6 to 10-year-old vine. Yeah. And so I out there and did that. But I just think maybe that's a role of an arborist to manage those trees and make sure there's not something killing them.
You bet. Yes, sir.
Other questions? Councilman Spencer.
A couple questions. Well, one's a comment. This summer was the first summer since I've been on council that I had a few issues raised with the music being played at Memorial Park. I don't know if Martha got a few of those, but I just wanted to say, Aaron, thank you for being involved in that. I heard quite a few of the citizens say that you were very accessible and responsive to their questions, and that you continuously went out there and monitored that. I'm sure it's kind of a difficult situation unless you just have someone solely dedicated to make sure, we're going to leave volume level 10 instead of 11.
Did the amps go to 11?
Because it goes to 11. But it worked. Appreciate that, doing that. My next question would be on some communication. It is my understanding that that you all have a retainer with Hi-Fi Communication for I think it's $2,500 a month. What do they do for you in relationship to what potentially they could do for other division plan. That's just kind of what I was.
Very good question. They're really engaged with High Five, and they with us, and have been for a number of years. They help us with all the social media stuff, reporting the social media. They help us direct ads relative to that. We also kind of ask them relative to the amphitheater and how to maximize the amphitheater. They helped us initially and continue so much relative to database acquisition of our users. What else do they do, Aaron? Those are things that come to my mind.
Those are the ones I made notes of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So they help target audience for you or a customer base to really focus in on services that you all provide to help promote that to that specific.
and feedback back to us in case that data is inaccurate. And we steer it from there.
Basically, they're a lot, they kind of tell us the story that they're seeing on the backside. So then we do, as staff, we update the commission on a monthly basis on, the trends that we're seeing from the hits on, Google and the website, where people are hitting from, what they're looking at. So that information is vital. So we know that if we invest the money or the time, that we are putting everything in the right place too.
Thank you.
Councilman Lester.
Yes, I've had a number of citizens complain that we don't have a dog park closer to the population areas. Are there any plans in the works to address that type of issue?
That's a great question. One that the staff and the commission has had a lot of discussion about from a strategic standpoint of where to put it and then the investment. We don't look at everything in what we do as an ROI, return on investment. That would be an area that you simply wouldn't have a return on investment. It's a cost of good type thing, service to provide. But if you do it the way the department likes to do things, which is as best we can afford, it's an expense. And it's, we estimate between $70,000 and $100,000 per park, depending on how big it's going to be. Because you've got to, I'm not an expert in this area, but we've had a lot of talks about what it would cost to do turf, what you've got to mediate
Waste.
and of course you have to build a structure of restrooms and water and a fence. I mean, it's quite costly. So to answer your question, sir, we have, it's a matter of getting cost relative to investment, figuring out how to make those work relative with what we've got with other projects. So.
It's on your radar. It's not in this budget
Oh,
cycle.
no. It's definitely on our radar, many discussions.
I've heard quite a few people ask about it. So.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Councilman Allers.
Getting back to the cameras and all that, the ones you use and all that, is that tied in with the police department, or specifically, where do you keep your cloud storage, and what all effects for what you can use, what you can disseminate? Is that, I'm just a little worried about what you do with the information. Does it go to Chief Wilde and then as consultation, hey, we saw this last night, and then, but do you have an on-site cloud storage for your cameras, or is it run through another city building?
Sure. So basically, in most cases, most of the parks have an NVR out on site. However, with static IPs, we're able to remote into that. So not only do I have remote access from my desk, so I don't have to go on site if there's an incident that the police department needs footage on, but then that their shift commander desk, they also have remote access there. And then a few of the officers have access in their cameras too, to like Community Park and East Miller Park as well. So they can pull it up on the phones as well. So if they have a hit, and then of course Flock, since I'm not post-certified, I don't get all the alerts such as, wanted person, stolen vehicle, et cetera. That goes directly to them, but it enables what they do, so they know if someone that shouldn't be in the park is on site. So that goes directly to them. And that data stores for about 30 days.
And I just wanted a quick comment is, I know Councilman Lester and I have mentioned about the view of the river from over at the federal courthouse that might be getting taken care of, not the trees down and all that. And I want to thank the Parks Commission for their response to that. Hopefully that'll be a great view again till we look out. I know people are, Councilman Lester, but I had people contact us about, that was a good walk down there, look around and then head back. And so I want to thank you for that.
Any other questions regarding the Parks budget? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe the next item is Ms. Senzi will be presenting. So welcome, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me this evening. I'm here to present a reorganization proposal to establish focus on revenue generation. We called it Grants and Community Partnerships. Before I get started, I wanted to give you a background, because we have a lot of new council members, just to give you a snapshot of where we are. We are currently under Neighborhood Services within the Department of Planning and Protective Services. We have 4 full-time staff. Our budgets are located on pages 169 through 181 of the budget book. Our core mission, our core objectives that we work on in neighborhood services, the grants, also housing, historic preservation, and sustainability programs such as your trash, recycling, household hazardous waste. We represent staff. We are staff liaisons to 2 citizen commissions, the Historic Preservation Commission, as well as the Environmental Quality Commission. The grants that we are in charge of have really bounced up as kind of the forefront of what we get identified for. Currently, we are managing $22.9 million in federal and state generated grants. Those are, if you want to see more detailed of the breakdown, that is on page 24 of the reorg plan. I should kind of back up and let you know that within your packets, if you were able to sync up your iPads, you should get more detailed information. I knew this was a big presentation, so I'm trying to, in the interest of time. So within your packets, you have the presentation as well as the Grants and Community Partnerships Reorganization Plan, and then some of the feedback that I received when we presented with the interim city administrator as well as other department directors are all in there for your reference. And I'll reference those page numbers in the interest of time. One thing that we're proud of in neighborhood services is in 2019, we really took the budget from our total project management from $333,000 to $22.9 million that we're currently managing in fiscal year 2023. I do want to point out, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, but I want you to see kind of the cadence of the money flow, because we're going to talk a lot about having a 3-year project planning cycle, because that's how we're able to pursue this source of revenue. So you'll see the incremental buildup, and then FY22 is really when we hit that first 3-year peak, and we're able to continue moving with federal grants. While we get kind of considered the grants experts within the city, that's not our goal, right? So our goal is to attract revenue generation. So that's what this next slide is. So our current impact, and you'll see that the grants is really a smaller piece of the pie that we're trying to leverage to incentivize private investment to invest in our community. So the pie broken down with a city investment, which is sales tax in kind, so staff time, and general revenue, $2.8 million, which is 2.9% in city investment. We have a county investment of $1 million. And then our federal grants, just the grant portion, not including the match, is $16.9 million. But obviously the biggest piece of the pie is that private investment. So that private investment is our actual target. You, as council, see a lot of our grants activities But what we're really trying to do is to allow private investors to come to the table. So how do we do that? Again, I'm going to reference that 3-year cycle. And if you want to know the budget breakdown, you can see on spreadsheet on page 24 of the grants of the reorg plan. It has the details of what grant is generating what type of private investment. How we generate that revenue for private investment is we simply telegraph our passes. We let everybody know what direction we're going 3 years in advance. So that way we're allowing private investment to come with us. So we're talking about planning documents that we're referencing. We say we're going here because it says it in this planning document. And then we start moving. And then in that next year, we're actually starting to implement and do some of that soft development. So our engineering, our environmental reviews, and then by the time we hit year 3, we're starting to actively pursue the project. So that way private investment has their opportunity to get their ducks in a row and come to the table. The question that I get asked is, can we do more? Yes, there's things that we have to restructure in order to do. Currently, with our 4 staff members in neighborhood services, and we currently do have 1 vacancy, we're operating at maximum capacity. If we wanted to pursue more funding, we would really have to look at adding a staff member. But that's, to me, is not very sustainable, because we would just keep building up. We'd max out that staff member, and then we'd build up, and then we'd have to request another one. It just doesn't make sense. So one of the things that we're looking at is this reorg plan. Our greatest need and opportunity is within the lane of public safety and infrastructure. That's not really a lane that neighborhood services currently drives in. And it's not to say that our chiefs of our public safety organizations and public works, that they're not doing all that they can, but they are driving the projects. They are doing the thing, they are providing the service. When they need funding, they come to council. So there needs to be an opportunity for us to look for other revenue resources. We need a long-range list of priorities and a strategic plan. A lot of what I do relies on that 3-year cycle, but if we're making decisions today about what we're going to do this year, I can't bring any other resources to the table. Our current processes and practices limit the ability to bring in outside investment. We need to basically recalibrate what we have in order to open up pipelines to outside investment. And this is kind of what I mean by that. So up on the screen is revenue flow. And we have the federal government, state government, county. We also collect fees, fines, and taxes for our own general revenue. And then we have the gold medal of private investment, which is that's the big piece of the pie. That's what we're trying to attract. Currently, however, we have kinked our lines. So we are extremely heavily cost burdened on that little box, the fees, fines, and taxes of our own local resources. And what I mean by this is, if we are currently talking about FY24 budget, the state has already passed their FY24 budget, and they're getting ready to start conversations about 25. What are we gonna ask for? We have to get those projects lined out. We needed to know what we are going to ask for last year in order to participate in this. Federal grants are also cut off for certain activities, because we are planning at the same time that we are trying to operate. So again, that 3-year project cycle. And because we're actively working on things right now, instead of doing that 3-year, we've kinked off private investment, which is our largest piece of the pie. They do not have the opportunity to come to the table because we can't tell them what we're doing in 3 years. So back down to the kind of the grit of the proposal is, how can we do more? So the proposal is to transition neighborhood services into grants and community partnerships under the Office of the City Administrator. We would eliminate neighborhood services and move up to under the City Administrator in order to be able to access all the activities of the other departments. So it opens up the lanes. Instead of just driving the lane of neighborhood services, we would have the opportunity to help Public Works, to help Public Safety, to help the other departments be able to plan out and coordinate their projects and identify sources of revenue that could help them accomplish their goals. We would transition staff into project managers that assist departments in planning, prioritizing, and finding funding resources to implement. So we would really take kind of a matrix style of organization versus that hierarchy organization, and we break it down into achieving those projects. We assist the city administrator with strategic planning efforts. That way we can start plugging in those 3-year cycle projects, and we could identify it, we could identify funding resources, and then we can implement. And also establish processes that align city needs with funding opportunities. The overall vision and goals. At its core is we want to establish staff responsibility to look solely at revenue resources. Right now that does not exist within the city. We are really good at getting the projects done, but we need to be able to kind of fill that gap and help council out to be able to find other resources of revenue. We want to realign and utilize existing resources to establish focus on obtaining funding for services and projects. We would like to pursue public-private partnerships. We would like to consolidate the expertise to better support funding pursuits for all city departments, not just within neighborhood services. We would like to establish practices that streamline processes and open up opportunities to achieve objectives. And we would like to facilitate strategic planning and project organization. So if you remember what I showed you at the beginning, this is our current makeup, and this would be the proposed. So I've been working with Department Director Clint Smith, and we've kind of tried to talk about how we would organize the job duties. So one of the things that we would hold on to is obviously the grants and the financial incentives. And then we would start working on more economic development, and housing kind of falls under that economic development bubble right now. So we would work to stimulate the housing development, and we would also implement financial incentives for population growth. What would remain in PPS is historic preservation duties, as well as our sustainability programs, so our trash, recycling, those sorts of activities. Here's a more in-depth look at our 3-year planning cycle, and really what it comes down to is 23 we're doing, 24 is scheduled, 25 we're plugging in and keeping that process running. So this is not one project, it occurs in a cycle. So as you have projects fall off, you're bringing another one on. And so you keep this going and after a while, once you get that initial buildup, that 3-year buildup, then you're implementing and achieving projects every fiscal year. This is the team. You see my face quite a bit, but you don't see the others. So I'm going to call them out because they're all in the room. Myself, and then we have our vacant position. Ann Stratman usually works on our housing programs, and she is here. And Carly Rankemeyer, she used to work for me, now she's in the police department, so she would be solely focused on public safety activities. And I do want to mention Dawn Kirshner, who does our sustainability programs, who would be staying in planning and protective services. I did include position descriptions on page 16 of the grants reorg. Fiscal impact. So for the investment to start off on this 3-year cycle, we would need a little less than 95,000 for the pink sheet. Details of the pink sheet can be found on 375 of your budget book or page 14 of the reorg plan. This includes a base rate increase within the core progression of the Evergreen study. So one of my staff, I'll call Ann, she's been with the city for 22 years, and she was one of those positions that needed to get within the core progression of the Evergreen study. So with this, if council were to accept this budget item, this pink sheet item, our little corner of the world would be right where it needs to be according to the Evergreen study. Coming up with the salaries for these positions, we really looked at what those core duties were. And so we have already existing within the city. We have engineers that do environmental reviews. That's something that our staff does. We have folks that are within finance that are procurement officers. We also do procurement. So we wear a lot of hats because we start with the beginning of a grant all the way to the end. And we have to be able to do kind of all segments of all of those jobs in order to accomplish it. Really the impact to the general fund is $56,373.86. Ms. Rankemeier's salary is half of the public safety sales tax. Whether you want it to remain in public safety or you want to take it out of the general fund, we can work with that. We also have the impact to the general fund may be reduced with incoming admin funds. And something that was not included in your budget book because it was accepted once we already started the budget process was the local tourism asset grant. That has $81,000 of admin, which is about $28,000 per fiscal year. So we're able to eat into that. I call the $94,000 an investment because we will actively try to leave as much of that on the table as we can so we can charge over to the federal side. This is kind of small, but this is kind of the breakdown of the next 3 years of grants, actually the next 4 years of grants. So we break down, we have a total admin bucket of about $620,000, but we spread it out over fiscal years to make sure that we can pay staff through the duration of the grant. What you see are the numbers, the department numbers on the side, so those are the individual grants that are in your budget books. And then you have the allocation of admin that goes along with it. We track it month by month to try to keep up with the expenses. Currently, neighborhood services, the total personnel service need is $282,000. And then if we were to implement the grants reorg, it would be $394,000. But if you can see in yellow, that's the impact to the general revenue fund. All the other funds are being shifted over to the federal side, which is FY24 is going to be just under $207,000. Just to highlight kind of the model that we use, and you can see this later. I think page 171 of your budget book has 530, and you can see kind of year after year how we've kind of carved out our personnel services. I ran this report for our general revenue fund of 530 a few weeks ago. We are originally budgeted $113,000, even though our staff costs are $280,000. Whatever I said earlier, $283,000. With 3 months left to go in the fiscal year, we've only spent $45,409 of our personnel services. We have approximately 60% of our personnel services budget left. So that's what I mean by eating into it. And as Ms. Perry noted at the beginning of the budget cycle, we did reduce our 530 personnel services cost down to $58,000. So we are constantly trying to leave that funding on the table to be used for other core priorities. There's a ton more information, but I'm trying to keep it quick. So at the end of the day, the key consideration is, do you feel that there's value added to the city to have dedicated staff pursuing additional revenue? And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Councilman Spencer.
Yeah. I've had some preliminary discussions with colleagues in the county, and I think there's some interest there as well to umbrella county and city-wide efforts, especially as it relates on the public works side of things. Because so many times we coordinate our efforts together. So I don't know if that could be an avenue that could be explored as well. And I think there's merit to this proposal, but we just are now starting the process of our efficiency and performance or organizational review study for all branches of service here in the city. So I kind of would like to have them have some input in that too before we get along too far down the road with this reorganization, because obviously we've committed to that, and we need to kind of use them since they were selected and this process was already committed to. So, but I do want to thank you for putting this together, and I think, you know, it is worthwhile to make the investment to get additional funds to supplement our services. So thank you for doing this.
Any other questions? Councilman Lester?
So I see in the documents that there's recommendations and input from administrator and department heads. I'm just wondering, we're getting a new administrator. Has there been any discussion with him about this, or has he had any input related to this?
I can try to address that, and the short answer is not to any level of detail. I think that was one of our biggest concerns moving this proposal forward. Was I felt very strongly that the permanent city administrator needed to be involved in this whatever transition evolution that would take place. And so that was one of my feedback items that you'll see identified in the memo there. And you know, we were very candid with Rachel and her staff, and also amongst the department directors. You know, we've kicked this around quite a bit, and I think the goal tonight was we wanted to give the full proposal from Ms. Cinzy and her staff to council to really let you guys hear it directly from them. And we think, I think I speak for all the department directors in that we want to see this process improve. We think there's great opportunity, but we also want to make sure that it gets done the right way. And one of those things is to make sure that the permanent city administrator is part of that process. And then I think also we might echo, you know, what Councilman Spencer said, that if we're going to have a group come in as a third party and review from the bottom up our whole organizational structure, it seems like they would be able to maybe help lead us in the best way to accomplish this. Because it is really important, and we do feel like it's a concept that has tremendous potential. So, you know, these comments really kind of started as an internal memo between staff. We just decided to put it in the packet for full disclosure. It's not polished. It's kind of, I'll just say, fairly straightforward and abrupt. And so I would ask you to read that. And I think if there is interest in pursuing this further, what we would recommend, or what I would recommend, is that we spend some more time really taking a detailed, deep look, and preferably with some of the other resources we've talked about, including the matrix study.
Thank you.
And I'll just real quick, one other thing I would just mention, and Ms. Cinzy knows that I'm going to talk about this, you know, is what she's proposed to you is kind of her part of this, the people that would be in her realm. There is some collateral responsibility that has to be addressed, you know, and one of those is in the police department, and I would ask Chief Willie to speak on that if we get to that point, and that there are some responsibilities that he would be looking to cover within his department that might be vacated, as well as public planning and protective services. And then also, one of the things that I feel really strongly about is that we almost need an auditor through finance to be part of this, because what we're talking about is a very complex, and the way that these grants and the requirements and the stipulations and the level of detail and specificity that's required to do it right is tremendous, and it's a big endeavor. And so I would almost say that from a financial perspective, we almost need a watchdog that is outside of the grants group, but that is kind of the internal auditor. And I don't know the right term for that. I'm not sure what we ever came up with a really good term. But someone that can really scrutinize that to make sure that whenever we are signing things as city administrator, mayor, council, that we're making sure we follow that to the letter. So there's more conversation that I think would be relevant if council decides to pursue this.
Councilman Mealy, do you have something?
Yeah, thank you. So remind me, and then maybe some of the newer council members, did the Evergreen study recommend the organizational change?
I don't think that was within the scope of the Evergreen study. It was purely compensation. And so it didn't even address classification. Is that fair to say? It was just compensation. So it didn't propose, I think when we reference it in this setting, we're talking about the role or the position and the compensation for that position as it currently exists. Is that a fair way to say that? I'm not sure if that's what you meant in your slide. When you cite Evergreen in your slide.
So that was because we requested pay increases or up classification. Within the Evergreen study, I think the conversation started with our former city administrator about, because of what we were doing, felt like we were not being compensated for the level of work that we were doing. So we talked about having Evergreen review our pay classifications. I don't think that happened, specifically because I know the admin was called out in the study, but not neighborhood services. And the comps that were pulled, neighborhood services in other cities is a nice way of calling code enforcement. So what we were doing based off of our job titles was being compared with code enforcement within other cities. So we felt like it didn't really do us any justice. But then also when we're talking about reorg and what it would take to get there, we wanted to compare it with other positions that are available within the community. And then also like those core job duties that I was talking about where, we do environmental reviews, which would normally be done by an engineer. And engineer one is ranked at, I think, a 116, if I remember correctly. So I was utilizing the Evergreen study to try to justify putting people in the positions that they were in, and not just me going, well, that sounds good. Trying to be a little bit methodical about where we placed people.
I have a general question for Chief. When's the last time the city reorged anything? When have we looked at something and said, maybe this works better to do it differently? 10 years?
I would say on a micro level, we've done it. On a macro level like this, we were just chatting, Cindy and I were before this meeting, and I said, this is kind of unprecedented for us to present a reorg at a budget meeting. It's not something that I've really ever seen happen before. So, to tell you how seriously we're taking it, I think that alone is an indicator that it's kind of a substantial change.
It's not substantial. Maybe we're just not used to it, so we don't ever do it.
Well, we did do it in the mid to late 90s when Pat Sullivan came in as
when they
Public Works and
community development and
development.
That's true. There was a substantial one there. And I don't know if that was at the end of a study or if that was just an internal city movement.
That was internal city movement.
What year? That was early 2000s, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was early 2000s. I'd say 2003, maybe somewhere.
I think it was when Matt Marash was the tail end of that.
2013 to reorg to spread that, break that back apart. Yes.
So at least 10 years from that perspective. On a smaller scale, we did it with law recently because some of that was requirements, I think, to be compliant, moving that out of under the cross.
Yeah, taking the municipal court out of the law department.
Yep. Okay, sorry.
On a small scale.
Budget conversation.
There's been a few others, like transit has moved around a little bit, the airport's moved around some, animal shelter has moved around some, like from departments.
Councilman Allers?
It's just a statement. I wanted to reiterate what Councilman Spencer said about talks in the community about working with our other partners in here, that we may be able to work together and maybe add a grant writer. I'm not sure what the terminology is, but a grant writing opportunities to share back and forth to really go after and focus in on stuff that maybe would free up some auditing time, for lack of a better way. But I look forward to what the new city administrator, Mr. Crane, comes through and get his view on that. And I was impressed with how you're looking at changing your own department, looking to utilize things better and all that. I want to say thank you so much for that. And looking forward instead of what's tomorrow and what did we do yesterday. So thank you very much for that.
One other thing I'll mention too it's been fairly new in the last couple of years is that, we've embarked on a joint venture with the county when it comes to JC Rep as economic development. So that's a new, very exciting, I think very beneficial element to in economic development. And so, we also would enter that into this equation as well.
Very much appreciated. Any other final questions from Ms. Senzi tonight? Thank you very much for the presentation. Ms. Perry, Administration's Department Division presentation.
So we're going to start on page 59. This would be what comes after the HR that we did at the previous meeting. This is the Finance Department. I'd like to start just with the personnel services under salaries. I'd like to point out that the customer service rep position that was eliminated in FY23 has still not been added back here, so it is still removed from this particular budget. Under materials and supplies, I would go down to printing. There has been a slight increase there because we're seeing a significant price increase in things like check stock and envelopes. Under dues and publications, not that this is a substantial amount of decrease, but I do want to call attention to the fact that we decreased the dues and publications and removed the GFOA document submission costs for both the annual financial report and the popular financial report. Once Mr. Crane comes in, if he has some other thoughts there, that could change. But right now, this budget is presented without those items included in it. The cost for audit services has a fairly substantial increase on it. That is based on the recent contract that council approved with Evers & Company CPAs. So it does include the cost of a non-GFOA submission. If Mr. Crane decides otherwise, there will be a considerable added cost there for the audit services associated with a GFOA submission. That's really all I have on the finance department.
Any questions regarding the finance department?
The next will be page 62, which is non-departmental. This has some changes in it. Advertising has been added here in non-departmental. We moved some money that had previously been in the finance department to cover electrical, plumbing, and HVAC bids that we typically have. Since those costs come out of the building and ground services and non-departmental, we've put the advertising for those services here as well, and that did reduce the finance department expense there. General insurance, which is under contractual services, we have based these figures on a 10% increase over the FY23 actuals. At this point, I don't think we've gotten any specific data on general insurance. And again, this is property, liability, auto, those kinds of things. Insurance deductibles, this is one of the items that the chief increased in his budget. The prior budget that had been here is not sufficient. When I did this in May, the expenses had already been incurred at just over $80,000. I have not looked at it since then, but we can anticipate that it's higher. This is one of those areas that we know has been deficient, and we're trying to make up some ground in small bites. The next item is professional services. This does have a slight increase. This is where we have the legislative consulting and also the city hall cleaning. That contract increased slightly, so we've built that into the budgeted costs here. On page 63, tree and landscape maintenance, this is one of the items that Chief brought up in his memo and also I think during our initial budget meeting. This is money that historically has been paid to parks on the first day of the fiscal year. And in FY24, we've actually removed the revenue from the Parks Department. We've put the budget for the expense here, and the intention is that Parks would consult on tree service. And then if it is determined that the third party needs to remove the tree, the bill would be received and the street department would pay it out of this particular general ledger account. That will allow us to keep track of true and actual costs expended on non-parks trees as we progress through the next fiscal year, to get an idea of what that impact truly is.
Councilman Lester.
So it's still at 25,000 and you know the expense has been a lot more. I mean, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times.
Unfortunately, I don't know that the expense has been that for the non-parks trees. I have not been provided any specific data on the non-parks trees, and this is one of the ways that we feel like we can get a good handle on that and have an idea as we move forward exactly what that expense will be. So it is still the same amount of money out of the general fund. It's just that the revenue will not be recognized within the parks fund. It will be paid directly to the third party who does the tree maintenance.
I'm a little bit surprised we couldn't track the parks and non-park part of that. But,
We had previously requested that information, I think, a couple of times, and were never able to get a good calculation or a good detailed listing of exactly what related specifically to non-parks trees.
thank you.
The last one I want to call attention to here is near the bottom of the page under capital projects, which would be vehicle leasing. This has not historically been budgeted here. This has historically been budgeted in non-departmental. There has been no budget, and so the theory behind the vehicle leasing was as those vehicles were turned back in, the proceeds would then be used to pay the invoices for the monthly leasing costs. I think we talked previously that this is one of the items of concern for us for FY23. We believe there's going to be a shortage in the current fiscal year. So what we're asking here is to move this particular vehicle leasing to the capital projects fund under 10990. So if you go to 10990, you will see that there, and we'll talk about it here in just a minute. What that would allow to happen is, since it would be in a capital projects fund, in the general fund, we then reappropriate any remaining monies there, so that if we have an overage one year and a shortage the next year, we can kind of deal with those ebbs and flows in the cost cycle.
And if I could really quickly on that one, just to follow up, when it comes to the vehicle lease, there was a large amount of credit that was built when we sold the fleet, the old fleet, when we got into this vehicle leasing. And we still believe that the concept has merit. It's something we need to watch really closely, but we really never ran deficits until this year. And this year was the first year we saw a major deficit. And you see the note in there where it says $85,000 short. We've made some changes to address that shortfall. And we think we've pretty much mitigated it and plan to move it forward with almost zero. What we did was we went from 32 total vehicles down to 30. So we were realizing the credit from the sale of those 2 vehicles to cover this $85,000 shortfall. Now, what that does is that puts staff in a little bit more of a leaner position in terms of access to vehicles. They've adapted well and have responded well to trying to make that work. But that may not be the right number. And what I mean by that is we're trying that. We're pushing staff to be more conscientious of each other and scheduling programming so that they can share the vehicles. We may have to go back up to 32 at some point. But we wanted to try this first and try to put the squeeze on a little bit to see if we could address this deficit and then maybe make that new number work. So that's what we're doing right now. And that also, because we got the credit from the sale of those vehicles, it should, for the most part, equalize that out for this year. However, going forward, we know that we're going to have good years and bad years when it comes to the sale of the fleet, and then depending on how competitive the purchase of the replacement fleet is. So that's where we want to have a rolling number to kind of give us a little bit of a buffer going forward. So that's the strategy. We think that's a much better strategy than just running a deficit.
Councilman Spencer.
For the benefit of the new council members, could you kind of give a brief overview of how this leasing program works?
Yeah, so it is it's a Run Through Enterprise is our vendor. And what that does is that they are able to secure vehicles, fleet pricing for us as a government entity at a reduced rate. And they're actually able to get those vehicles. One of the challenges you have in today's world is supply chain. And they're one of the few organizations that actually has the purchasing power to get them and get them on the government rate in a quantity that's appropriate for something like a program like this. And so then we pay into that monthly. And then when the vehicle is sold, which is the other key piece, is that they're able to sell them in a very competitive way as well. And so the theory is that as the secondary market for used vehicles is high, and we can purchase them lower as long as we keep them for, I believe it's 12 months, a year, we're able to sell those. And so in good years, you can actually see a little bit of a surplus, and in bad years, you'll see a deficit. Parks has actually done this longer than we have. They started it and were at least a year ahead of us, and we saw what they were doing and said, this is something we ought to look into. Britt Smith is really kind of the fleet manager for this program, and he could provide more insight for you as well. And we have some reports that we're working on. But we think the theory is probably worth investing in, and that the concept is good. We just want to make sure that we have a little bit more of like I said, a buffer to round out the rough years when they're just not as good at a secondary market to sell.
Are those fleet vehicles serviced through central maintenance, or is it third party?
I believe we pay for the service as part of that lease fee, and then so it takes a little bit of the burden off of central maintenance. And then again, they're safer, they're more efficient. People always ask us, well, why do you buy the 4-door truck? When there could be more efficient vehicles, and that's a great question. We do that because they tell us that has the best resale potential. So it's a matter of which vehicles can they sell on the secondary market the best and return that surplus to us.
Yeah, and you'll actually notice that if you go in the back lot and you do that with any type of regularity. I think last cycle we were on Silverados and now we're on F-150s, and really that was dictated to us by the program saying, okay, there's going to be a greater market for the F-150s this year. Buy those, and then when you sell them, there'll be greater value derived out of them. So it's a very fluid type program that's kind of dictated by enterprises. Really made a nice business model out of this by local governments throughout the country.
It doesn't work for all vehicles, and we talk about, could it be expanded? Yes, I know Parks has experimented with some medium-duty vehicles and some heavier vehicles, and I'm sure they have some insight. We kind of wanted to let them figure that out first and then decide whether or not it was something we want to do. But we really feel like it does a couple things. It keeps our people in safe, reliable vehicles. It prevents us from paying some of the long-term costs, like replacement of tires or major overhauls, those kind of things. But it also allows for that replacement, kind of a way to keep that fleet healthy without having the major influx of cash.
And you flip those every year?
It depends on the timeline for delivery. Sometimes we'll run a little bit longer. Sometimes we'll go 18 months. But yeah, the plan is roughly every year. Yeah. And I don't know, does Parks, do you guys have any, you guys really probably have a lot more experience with that than we do. How's it been on the medium duty market?
It's been really good, actually. We've used it even on the golf course, some of the maintenance equipment over there, and we're seeing early returns from it, frankly, especially in the areas that, like you said, you use driving vehicles, we're using equipment for a long time, then you got to figure out your maintenance costs really get extenuated from that point. So you need to, it's an investment to have a reliable vehicle without that big time major investment on the back end. And how long do you drive it? And you're driving rust buckets around. So that's the way we looked at it. Did you have?
Well said.
Page 64 lists the 2 pink sheets that are in the non-departmental, just because we really didn't have a better place to put them. We've already talked about both of these. One is the improved vacation and sick leave benefit accruals and the vacation cap. This was something that the chief has recommended within his budget, as did the mayor. And then the other one that was not approved is the sick leave payout upon separation for long-term employees. There was a PowerPoint, and this was also part of the memo that was originally distributed with the budget documents. Any question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so at some point in time, the committee and the council's gonna have to make a decision if the council wants to move ahead with the vacation and sick accruals kind of programs, how we want to do that. If it's something that the council wants to approve as part of the budget, that budget ordinance is going to look a little bit different than years past, because in order to make the changes, that's actually have to be a change made to the personnel policy manual. So it's really kind of two choices: have a addition to the budget ordinance, or a separate ordinance that makes the necessary changes to the personnel policy manual. So it's really kind of a question of form that the council's going to have to decide at some point in time. Just want to highlight that to your rubber talking about.
Thank you. Page 67 is a department that we've added. This is the emergency management operations that Chief Schofield previously spoke about, where we pulled it out of the police department budget, gave it its own budget. This is the amount of money that's previously been budgeted in the police department budget, so this will allow us to track this particular item separately. The next one is page 70. This is the IT department. I want to point out in personnel services under salaries, last year the council approved some of the funds from one of our vacant positions to be used for third-party network administration. That is still the intention as we move forward into FY24. That seems to be working well. They're providing a good service for us, and staff is happy with it. The next item will be operational supplies. There's been a significant increase here. We've doubled the request. Price increases on cables and things like that have gone up substantially. And I do want to point out that those are things that the IT department purchases for departments across the city. It is not IT equipment for that particular department. It's for the service that they provide to other city departments. The last one that I have on here is software license and maintenance. This has had a substantial price increase, and that includes the door access, which I do have in a pink sheet that I'll talk about here in just a minute. On page 71, the other item that we have added here is the council chamber media and equipment replacement and repair. We've put a small budget in here to pay for the team's license here in the council chambers. I do have several pink sheets that are listed within this department. First on the list is updating door access for 11 city locations. The door access system that we have is currently not supported. It's had many failures, and that system is used across 11 facilities, and so this would be the cost to update the access system. All of the boxes above the doors need to be replaced, which is what controls the doors opening. There's a new microwave radio for Fire Station 3 dispatch. There is the Microsoft, that microwave radio is also a joint project with the police department, and I think Chief Wilde will talk about that too during his presentation. Microsoft 365 to replace Office 2019. This is going to be a substantial expense. This has an end-of-life date of October 10th, 2023, so not very far off. It is reported that Microsoft's going to extend that to October 14th of 2025, but eventually all users will have to go to the 365 subscription service, and to do that is the cost of the $86,500. We are exploring whether or not we can modify some of the licenses that we do currently have to attempt to spread them out across various levels depending on what staff actually uses from that particular software. This will be an ongoing cost. So the intention here, while I understand this is only to cover 1 year of the service, it would allow us to get it started It would allow us to review and see whether or not we can reduce some of the licenses to a lower level, and then move forward with something that's going to be a requirement as we move into 2025. We have a new microwave radio for Station 4. There's also a request for 1 full-time GIS specialist. We currently have 2 staff members in GIS, and they do a large volume of work for both the city and the county. And so this request is to add a specialist to the GIS area. Also on the list are cameras, indoor cameras for City Hall. There is Microsoft 365 email that would be needed for new learning management system. So the new learning management system that council approved in the current fiscal year requires a user license or an email account essentially. And we do have many staff people that don't have a dedicated email account. And so these would be the licenses that would be required to cover employees that do not currently have a city email address in order to use the e-learning system. And then finally, the City Hall cameras for outdoors. Again, those quotes are things that we got this current year, this fiscal year, so those pricings could change, but we did put them on our pink sheet list just to make sure council was aware of them.
And on the, thank you, Ms. Perry. On the Microsoft 300 or Microsoft 365, it's been a long day. $86,547. Have you looked into the web-based option that's substantially less in cost, and maybe the staff that can utilize that versus the software option?
That is what we're talking about as far as being able to reduce some of the licenses to a lower level. Those lower level licenses are web-based as opposed to on-premise. We're still vetting those things, and then that would be an undertaking to figure out exactly what version each staff person needs. But yes, we are in the process of that.
And then just really quick, this is kind of off subject, but if there's an emergency in the city and we have staff that don't have email, how do they get notification?
From their supervisor.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else, Ms. Perry?
I can keep going or you can shut me down.
It's a land speed record.
I'm not finished though. Sorry.
I might, if I could, Mr. Chairman, I might mention on a couple of the items that she mentioned that also received widespread support from department directors when we did the scoring. Both the Microsoft 365 and the access control are items that we put into the loading zone just because of the amount of the volume of use citywide every day, all the time, 24/7. And so I think the department directors all recognize the critical nature of both those things. And she didn't mention it on the door access, that is a system that is already beyond its useful life. And we are just cobbling pieces together to kind of keep it alive. It's one of those emergent expenses that at some point we probably, if we don't get it in this budget, we'll bring to you probably a supplemental request saying that it kind of has to be done just to keep this premises secure. So I would just reemphasize the importance of the critical nature of those two things.
So as we end the meeting, then we do have just a couple of small things to talk about in the general fund, one of which would be the subsidies that we have for transit and airport. Then we could talk about at the next meeting the sales tax, the public safety tax, and a few small special revenue accounts. I wouldn't anticipate that would take much more than maybe 15 minutes to cover everything else at the beginning of the meeting on Thursday, if that's.
All those things on Thursday?
Yes.
Yeah, and then we'll move into.
15 minutes, I think, and then the schedule is to go into police and fire if that's what the committee prefers.
Past years would apply here also. I think that should probably be enough time for police and fire. 45 minutes or so. No, like are we going a full hour and a half on?
So
on
Thursday's
Thursday?
meeting is scheduled for an hour and a half, and quite possibly, I suppose, we could get to the start of council discussion. Maybe we could talk about those preloaded things on the parking lot at the end of that meeting so that council could start discussions pretty quickly after that.
90-minute meeting for sure, I think. for public comment tonight, Mr. Jeff Olson has signed up. Sir, I apologize for the wait, but you have up to 3 minutes, please.
Mr. Chairman, council members, Mr. Mayor, park staff. My name is Jeff Olson. I live here in the 5th Ward. I've been a resident most of my life in the city of Jefferson, and I've enjoyed the parks during that entire time. They've been great places for our kids to play when we were growing up. I went to school picnics in Memorial Riverside Park, and just really got a lot of benefit from it. Right now, I'm actually the stream team administrator for the Capital City Fly Fishers Club, and a great benefit maybe people don't know about is that Parks Department is funding half the cost of Trout and McKay Lake every year. It's happened since approximately 2006. I'm not sure exactly that. Conservation covers the other half, so it's a great perk. Free trout fishing right here in the city. And it goes from November 1st until they're caught at the end of March. So, ready opportunity to be grateful to the Parks Department. The amphitheater at Riverside Park is a great way to attract people, businesses to our city, make it more likely for people who want to come here and live here. I walk through the parks every day with my wife. I'm probably on the cameras, both at Sprung and at Riverside. But just again, I want to say that the parks are a great asset for the city. Way to make people more likely to come here and want to stay here. So appreciate whatever we need.
Thank you very much, sir, for being here tonight and sharing those comments. Is there anyone else here tonight to make public comment? Seeing none. Our next meeting, as was just said, is this Thursday, August 31st, from 12 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. Discussing those departments and budgets that were just listed. Councilman Ellers?
On that, can we bring lunch? Something to eat?
Please.
All right. I didn't know what the protocol was.
No crunching. No crunching.
Soft and quiet. Nothing else this evening? I will call.
Jay's all around.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. I was thinking I had $10 to bet.
Budget on you.